They found a car door in the forest, and what was scratched into the paint explained everything. The air in the Monongahela National Forest was thick enough to drink, heavy with the scent of pine rot and damp earth. For 10 days it had been the only air David knew, 10 days of shouting his daughter's name, Chloe, until his throat was a raw, bleeding wound. 10 days of watching his wife, Sarah, shrink into a ghost of herself, her eyes hollowed out by a grief so vast it seemed to swallow the light around her. They were part of a search party, a dwindling band of volunteers and weary sheriff's deputies who combed the dense woods with a kind of grim, methodical hopelessness. Chloe was gone, vanished from a roadside overlook just after dusk. Her car was still there, locked. Her purse was on the passenger seat. Her phone was missing. It was Sarah who found it. Not Chloe, but the thing that broke the world. She had wandered away from the main search grid, drawn by a flicker of unnatural color through the latticework of ferns and tangled rhododendron. The others followed the rigid lines on their GPS units. Their movements, logical, procedural. Sarah followed the pull of her own unraveling heart. It led her down a steep, muddy embankment, her boots sinking into the muck, the wet leaves slapping against her face like cold, pitying hands. And then she saw it. A car door. It was propped against the trunk of an ancient moss-covered oak, as if placed there for an art installation. It was the wrong color. Chloe's car was a modest silver sedan. This door was a deep, metallic sapphire, the kind of color that belonged on a luxury vehicle, something sleek and predatory. It was ripped from its hinges. The metal along the edge was twisted into a grotesque snarl of torn steel and severed wires, a testament to a moment of impossible, brutal force. The window was shattered, but fragments of tinted glass still clung to the frame like jagged black teeth. David heard Sarah's sound before he saw her. It wasn't a scream. It was a low guttural noise, the sound of an animal caught in a trap. A sound of pure, unadulterated agony that cut through the forest's oppressive silence. He crashed through the undergrowth, his own exhaustion forgotten, his heart hammering against his ribs with a terror that was sickeningly familiar. He found her on her knees in the mud, her hands hovering over the door, trembling. "Sarah, what is it? What did you find?" he asked, his voice cracking. She didn't answer. She couldn't. She was transfixed, her gaze locked on the surface of the door. David knelt beside her, his eyes tracing the path of hers. The sapphire paint was marred, not by the crash, not by the violence that had torn it from its body. It was marred by something else. Scratches, long, frantic gouges that crisscrossed. The glossy finish. They weren't random. They weren't the chaotic marks of branches or rocks. They were deliberate, desperate. He leaned closer, his breath catching in his chest. The forest seemed to hold its breath with him. The birds went silent. The wind died. There was only the thumping of his own blood in his ears and the ragged sound of his wife's breathing. The scratches were clustered in one area, near where the handle would have been. They were deep, dug into the metal with a furious strength. And within the chaos of the lines, a pattern began to emerge. Not a picture, not a symbol. Letters. They were crude, misshapen, carved by a tool that was not meant for writing. A key, maybe, or a ring. David's mind snagged on that thought. A ring. Chloe wore a ring. A silver ring her grandmother had given her. A clunky Art Deco piece with a sharp, geometric edge. He could picture it on her finger, could feel the memory of its coldness against his cheek when she'd hug him. He squinted, trying to decipher the frantic scrawl. The paint was chipped and flaking around the edges of the gouges, making it difficult to read. He saw a C or maybe a G, then an L, no, an E. His heart stopped. He felt the blood drain from his face. Sarah finally let out a sob, a wrenching, full-bodied sound that seemed to tear from the deepest part of her soul. "It's her handwriting," she whispered, her voice a fragile, broken thing. "David, it's her handwriting." He saw it then, his mind finally accepting what his eyes were telling him. The way the E looped the sharp, definitive angle of the L, it was Chloe's. He'd seen it 1,000 times on birthday cards and grocery lists and silly notes left on the fridge. And he could see the letters now, clear as day. Scratched into the sapphire paint of a stranger's car door, a message clawed from the heart of a nightmare. HELP, and then, below it, another word, or the beginning of one. The scratches were deeper here, more frenzied, as if time was running out. TR of word was cut short. The final scratch veered off, a long, sharp gash that sliced down the length of the door, ending in a violent, star-shaped burst of chipped paint, as if the hand holding the tool had been suddenly, violently wrenched away. A wave of nausea washed over David. This wasn't just a piece of a car. This was a story, a final, desperate testament. He could see it, a scene playing out in his mind with horrifying clarity. Chloe, in the dark, in a car that was not her own. The cold panic, the fight, her hand, her ring, scraping against the door. Her last act on this earth, an attempt to leave a trace, to scream for help into the silent, uncaring metal. The door was the weapon, and it was the tombstone. It was the crime scene, and the evidence. The sheriff, a man named Brody, with tired eyes and a permanent slump to his shoulders, arrived 20 minutes later. He looked at the door, then at Sarah's and David's faces, and his professional mask seemed to crack for a moment. He ran a hand over his jaw. "Jesus Christ," he muttered. He crouched down, careful not to touch anything. "You're sure it's her handwriting?" "I'm her mother," Sarah said, her voice flat, devoid of all emotion now. It was a terrifying, hollowed-out calm. "I know her handwriting better than I know my own face." Brody nodded slowly. He understood. This changed everything. This wasn't a girl who had wandered off. This wasn't a tragic accident. This wasn't abduction. This was a homicide. The car door was a declaration of war. "We need to identify the vehicle," Brody said, his voice now crisp, all business. "The VIN should be stamped on the inside frame." His deputy, a young, eager kid named Miller, carefully turned the door over. The mangled edge groaned in protest. They found the VIN plate, and Miller radioed it in. The weight was excruciating. David held Sarah, her body rigid in his arms. She stared at the scratches, her eyes unblinking, as if she could will them to reveal more, to finish the story, to give her back the daughter who had been stolen from her. The radio crackled to life. Miller listened, his face piling. He looked at Brody, then at David and Sarah, and a flicker of something pity, fear, all crossed his face. "Sheriff Miller said," his voice hushed. "The vehicle, it's registered to Judge Marcus Thorne." The name landed in the clearing like a physical blow. Judge Thorne, the most powerful man in the county. A man who owned half the town, who had senators on speed dial, who was in the local paper as a pillar of the community, a paragon of justice and integrity. A man Chloe had been working for as a legal intern for the past 6 months. David felt the ground shift beneath his feet. The forest, the search, the past 10 days of agonizing uncertainty, was all a prelude. The real nightmare was just beginning. He looked at the car door, at his daughter's final, desperate plea scratched into the paint of her mentor's, her employer's, car. The scratches weren't just a message, they were an accusation. And in that moment, David understood the chilling, terrible meaning of the unfinished word, TI. Tree? No, he knew, with a certainty that froze the marrow in his bones, what she had been trying to write. Thorn. A sudden, violent gust of wind tore through the trees, rattling the branches, and for a moment, it sounded like a scream. Or maybe, David thought, it was a warning. The cliffhanger wasn't just what had happened to Chloe. It was what was about to happen to them. They had found the truth, scratched into a piece of metal in the middle of the woods. But in a world where men like Marcus Thorne held all the power, the truth wasn't a key. It was a cage. Chloe had always been a collector of light. She collected sunsets in the form of photographs, snippets of laughter on her phone, and moments of quiet joy like they were rare, precious jewels. She was the kind of person who could find beauty in a cracked sidewalk or a rain-streaked window. Her father, David, a high school history teacher, had fostered in her a deep love for the stories of the past, for the quiet heroes and the loud world-changing events. Her mother, Sarah, a potter, had given her a love for the tangible, for the feel of earth and the creation of form from chaos. Chloe was a perfect, vibrant fusion of them both. A dreamer with her hands in the clay, a historian with her eyes on the horizon. Her internship with Judge Marcus Thorne was supposed to be the culmination of all that light. It was her first step into the world she dreamed of changing, a world of law and justice. She had been ecstatic when she got the position. Thorne was a legend in West Virginia, a self-made man who had risen from a coal miner's son to a federal judge with a reputation for being tough but fair. He was handsome, charismatic, with a smile that could disarm a hostile witness and a voice that resonated with authority and old-world charm. He had taken a special interest in Chloe, praising her sharp mind and her tireless work ethic. "She has a fire in her," he'd told David and Sarah at a county fundraiser, his hand resting paternally on Chloe's shoulder. "A fire for justice. This world needs more of that." David had felt a surge of pride that night, but also a faint, inexplicable unease. There was something in Thorne's eyes, a proprietary gleam, as he looked at Chloe, that felt less like mentorship and more like ownership. It was a flicker of something cold and ancient, a predator's assessment of its prey. David had dismissed it as his own paternal paranoia. Chloe was 22, a woman, brilliant and capable. She could handle herself. It was a mistake that would haunt him for the rest of his life. The last time he saw her alive, she was standing in the doorway of their home, her bag slung over her shoulder. She was heading to Thorne's sprawling estate for a mentorship dinner, something the judge occasionally did for his interns. She'd been distracted, her usual incandescence dimmed. "Is everything okay, sweetie?" Sarah had asked, wiping her clay-dusted hands on her apron. Chloe had forced a smile. "Yeah, just tired. The judge is a perfectionist. He's been riding me hard on the Harrison brief." "You're the best intern he's ever had," David said, ruffling her hair. "He knows it." Her smile wavered. "I hope so," she'd said, her voice small. Then she hugged them both, a little tighter than usual. "I love you guys." And then she was gone, her silver sedan disappearing down their long gravel driveway, leaving behind a plume of dust and a silence that, in retrospect, felt like a premonition. Marcus Thorne lived in a different world. His house wasn't a home. It was a fortress of glass and stone perched on a ridge overlooking the entire county. It was a monument to his own power, a place designed to make visitors feel small and insignificant. Inside, the walls were lined with books he'd never read and artifacts from cultures he'd never bothered to understand. It was a curated display of intellectualism, a carefully constructed facade for a man whose true nature was brutally simplistic. Thorne was a creature of appetites. He consumed things, companies, land, political influence, people. He had a wife, a fragile, bird-like woman named Eleanor who drifted through the cavernous rooms of their home like a phantom, her eyes perpetually glazed over with a cocktail of prescription drugs and quiet despair. She was his first acquisition, a beautiful, wealthy debutante who had secured his entry into the state's upper echelon. He had broken her spirit slowly, methodically, until all that was left was a beautiful, empty shell, another trophy for his collection. His cruelty was a private, intimate thing. It was in the way he would accidentally spill a glass of red wine on Eleanor's white dress just before a party. His apology laced with a silken thread of contempt. It was in the way he would praise an employee in public, only to eviscerate them in private for a minor mistake, his voice dropping to a terrifying, controlled whisper. He enjoyed the power imbalance, the fear he could inspire with a single, calculated glance. He saw people not as human beings, but as instruments for his own gratification or obstacles to his own ambition. Chloe, with her bright, defiant fire, had been an irresistible challenge. He saw her not as a student to be mentored, but as a thing to be conquered, to be broken and remade in his own image. The mentorship dinners were a hunting ground. He would ply his interns with expensive wine, probing their boundaries, testing their resolve. enjoying the slow, delicious dance of intimidation. He would dangle the promise of a future clerkship, a recommendation, a career-like allure, drawing them deeper into his web. With Chloe, he had miscalculated. He had mistaken her fire for arrogance, her passion for naivete. He didn't realize that her fire wasn't just for justice in the abstract. It was a part of her soul, and when he tried to extinguish it, she fought back. The witness was a boy named Leo. He was 17, and his life was a constellation of secrets. He lived in a rundown trailer on the edge of the forest with a father who drank his disability checks and a mother who had vanished. Years ago, Leo's secret was that he was a poacher. Not for sport, but for survival. He knew the woods better than the sheriff's deputies, knew the game trails and the hidden hollows where the deer came to drink at twilight. His second secret, the one that weighed on him more heavily, was that he was in love with Chloe. He'd known her from a distance. He worked part-time bagging groceries at the Piggly Wiggly, and she would come in on Tuesdays, her smile so bright it seemed to make the fluorescent lights hum. He'd memorized her order: kale, almond milk, a specific brand of dark chocolate, a bouquet of fresh flowers for her mother. He never spoke to her beyond a mumbled "have a nice day." To her, he was invisible, just another part of the scenery of their small town. To him, she was everything. On the night she disappeared, Leo was in the woods, checking his snares. He was near the overlook, hidden in a thicket of pines, the scent of resin sharp in the cool night air. He saw her silver sedan pulling. He watched, as she got out, her silhouette framed against the fading purple and orange of the sky. His heart did a stupid little flip in his chest. He was about to shrink back into the shadows when another car pulled in, a big, dark, expensive-looking car. A sapphire blue Lexus. Leo watched as Judge Thorne got out. He recognized him immediately. The judge was a local celebrity. Leo saw him greet Chloe, saw the way his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. He saw Chloe's posture stiffen, her arms crossing over her chest. Their voices were too low to carry, but the body language was a language Leo understood. It was the language of a cornered animal. He saw Thorne gesture towards his car, his movements expansive, charming. He saw Chloe shake her head. The judge's smile vanished. He took a step closer, his body blocking Leo's view of Chloe's face. He grabbed her arm. Fear, cold and sharp, lanced through Leo. This was wrong. This was all wrong. He was a poacher. A nobody. The man in the parking lot was a judge. What could he do? He was frozen, a prisoner of his own fear and inadequacy. He saw the struggle. It was brief, violent. Thorne was strong. He forced Chloe towards his car, her feet dragging on the gravel. He opened the passenger door and shoved her inside. Leo heard a muffled cry, quickly silenced. The door slammed shut. The sapphire Lexus peeled out of the overlook, its tires spitting gravel, and sped off into the darkness, leaving Chloe's empty sedan behind like a ghost ship. Leo stayed in the woods for an hour, his body trembling, his mind screaming. He should have done something. He should have yelled, thrown a rock, called the police. But he hadn't. He was a coward, the son of a drunk, a poacher. Who would believe him? Thorne would crush him. He would say Leo was a delinquent, a liar. He would have him arrested for poaching, and no one would ever listen to a word he said about the judge. So he did nothing. He crept back to his trailer, the secret, a toxic, burning coal in his gut. The next day, when the news broke that Chloe was missing, the coal began to smolder. When the search parties started, it began to smoke. And 10 days later, when he heard that they had found a car door, a sapphire blue car door, registered to Judge Marcus Thorne, the secret burst into an inferno of guilt and terror that threatened to consume him whole. He knew what had happened. He had seen it, and his silence had made him an accomplice. The hidden witness was now a prisoner, trapped not by bars, but by his own conscience, haunted by the ghost of a girl who bought kale and dark chocolate on Tuesdays, and by the image of her fighting for her life in the twilight. The discovery of the car door was a match thrown on gasoline. The town of Blackwater Creek, once united in its hopeful search for Chloe, fractured overnight. The name Thorn was a fault line that split the community down the middle. On one side were those who had known the judge for years, who had benefited from his patronage, who saw him as the town's benevolent patriarch. To them, the idea that he could be involved in a young woman's disappearance was not just unlikely. It was blasphemous. It was an attack on the very foundation of their town. "It's a mistake," said Mayor Thompson, at an impromptu press conference on the steps of the courthouse. His arm around a stoic, grim-faced Marcus Thorn. "A tragic, terrible mistake. The door was likely stolen. Marcus was the victim of a theft weeks ago. He is as devastated by this as anyone." Thorn, dressed in a somber grey suit, played his part to perfection. His face was a mask of dignified grief. He spoke of Chloe's promise, her brilliance. He called her like a daughter to him. "My wife, Eleanor, and I are praying for her safe return," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "And we have every confidence that Sheriff Brody will find the monster responsible for this." The performance was masterful. It swayed public opinion. Suddenly, David and Sarah weren't just grieving parents. They were accusers. They were unstable. Their insistence that the scratches were Chloe's handwriting was painted as a delusion. Born of trauma, whispers started in the grocery store aisles and the church pews. "They're not thinking clearly. The grief has made them crazy. How dare they accuse a man like the judge?" Friends they had known for 20 years suddenly crossed the street to avoid them. Their phone calls to the sheriff's office went unanswered. The injustice was a physical pressure, a weight that settled on David's chest, making it hard to breathe. He and Sarah were adrift in an ocean of disbelief, clinging to the one piece of wreckage that told the truth. A scratched sapphire car door that now sat in an evidence locker. Dismissed and ignored, Sheriff Brody, a man David had once considered a friend, became a wall of bureaucratic indifference. "We're looking at all the angles, David," he'd say, his eyes avoiding David's. "The judge has an alibi. He was at a fundraiser in Charleston that night. We have a dozen witnesses, a dozen of his friends." David had yelled, his voice echoing in the sterile lobby of the station. He drove back that night. He could have done it. "The door proves it." "The door proves nothing," Brody said, his voice cold. "Not without a body. Not without a confession. Right now all you have is a piece of metal and a theory. The judge has a reputation. You have grief." The word was a dismissal, a weapon used to invalidate their truth. The power imbalance was absolute. It was the word of a respected federal judge against the desperate, hysterical claims of two broken parents. And in Blackwater Creek, power was the only currency that mattered. Thorn began to tighten the screws. It was never direct, always deniable. The bank called David, suddenly concerned about the mortgage on their house, a mortgage they had never missed a payment on. The school board scheduled a performance review for him, citing anonymous student complaints he'd never heard of before. Sarah went to her pottery studio to find the window smashed and the words "Leave him alone" spray painted on the wall. When they reported it, Sheriff Brody logged it as random vandalism. The cruelty was in the precision, the surgical application of fear. Thorn wasn't just denying his crime. He was punishing them for discovering it. He was making an example of them. He was demonstrating the reach of his power, showing them how easily he could dismantle their lives, piece by piece. The town became a prison, every familiar face a potential spy, every ring of the phone a potential threat. They were isolated, ostracized, their grief compounded by a terrifying, suffocating paranoia. For Leo, the world had shrunk to the size of his secret. He read the articles in the paper, saw the news reports. He saw the photos of David and Sarah, their faces etched with a pain he felt responsible for. He saw JudgeThorn.com and Confident, lying to the entire world. The guilt was a physical thing, a sickness that soured the food in his stomach and kept him awake at night. Staring at the water-stained ceiling of his trailer, he saw Sarah in the Piggly Wiggly one afternoon. She looked like a wraith, her clothes hanging off her frail frame, her eyes darting around nervously. She was buying a single carton of milk and a loaf of bread. She fumbled with her purse, her hands shaking so badly she dropped her wallet. Coins scattered across the dirty linoleum floor. Leo, stocking shelves nearby, watched as people stepped over them, pretending not to see. The same people who had brought casseroles to the house a week ago now couldn't be bothered to help a grieving mother pick up her change. Something inside Leo snapped. The fear that had held him silent for so long was suddenly eclipsed by a surge of rage. He walked over and knelt, his hands gathering the scattered coins. "Here you go, Mrs. Miller," he said, his voice barely a whisper. He couldn't bring himself to use her new, tragic name. He still thought of her as Chloe's mum. Sarah looked at him, her eyes focusing on his face for the first time. There was no recognition, just a vacant, weary sadness. "Thank you," she murmured. "I'm so sorry about Chloe," Leo blurted out, the words clumsy, inadequate. A flicker of life returned to Sarah's eyes. "You knew her." Yeah, from here. She was always nice." Sarah gave him a small, sad smile. "Yes, she was." She took the coins, her fingers brushing his. Her hand was ice cold. As she turned to leave, Leo felt a desperate, reckless urge. "They're wrong," he said, his voice low and urgent. "About the judge, you're right. Don't let them stop you." Sarah froze. She turned back slowly, her eyes searching his face, a dawning, desperate hope in them. "What do you know?" Leo's courage evaporated as quickly as it had come. The image of Thorne's cold eyes, the memory of his power, flooded his mind. He saw his father, helpless. He saw himself in a juvenile detention center. "Nothing," he stammered, looking down at the floor. "Just, I believe you." He turned and fled, disappearing into the back storeroom, his heart pounding. He had said too much. He had done too little. The encounter left him shaken, his conscience screaming. He had seen the hope in Sarah's eyes, and he had snuffed it out. The conflict was escalating, the pressure building. Thorne, emboldened by the town's support and the police's inaction, grew more brazen. He drove his new Car-An, identical sapphire blue Lexus, past David and Sarah's house, slowing down just enough for them to see him behind the wheel. His face impassive, a silent, chilling message of his untouchability. He was a monster hiding in plain sight, protected by a wall of money, influence, and fear. David felt himself starting to break. The constant stress, the public humiliation, the terrifying sense of helplessness, it was all eroding his hope, leaving behind a raw, impotent rage. He started drinking, a bottle of whiskey his only companion late at night, as Sarah slept fitfully. In their bed, he would sit in the dark, the car door replaying in his mind, the unfinished word truer taunt, a riddle he couldn't solve. One night, drunk and desperate, he drove to Thorne's estate. He parked outside the massive iron gates, staring up at the house, a monolith of light and power against the dark sky. He imagined Chloe inside that house. He imagined her fear. He imagined her fight. He got out of his car, his mind a fog of whiskey and grief, and he screamed Thorne's name, a long, ragged cry of pure hatred that was swallowed by the wind. The gates swung open. A single figure emerged from the shadows. It was Thorne. He walked slowly down the long driveway, his hands in the pockets of his expensive trousers. His expression, one of mild curiosity, as if he were observing a strange new species of insect. "David," he said, his voice calm, reasonable, "you should go home. You're not well." "What did you do to her?" David roared, stumbling forward. "What did you do to my daughter?" Thorne stopped a few feet away. The charming mask was gone. In the dim light from the gate lamps, his face was cold, reptilian. "Your daughter was a disappointment," he said, his voice a low, venomous hiss. "She was weak, like you." The words hit David harder than a physical blow. He lunged at Thorne, a blind, clumsy attack fueled by rage and alcohol. Thorne didn't even flinch. He sidestepped David's charge with an almost casual grace. And David fell, sprawling onto the cold asphalt. Thorne looked down at him, a flicker of contempt in his eyes. "You see, this is why people like you lose. You're all emotion. Control," He nudged David's shoulder with the toe of his polished leather shoe. "Go home, David, before you get hurt. Before your wife gets hurt, you have no idea what you're up against." He turned and walked back towards the house, the gates closing silently behind him. David lay on the ground, the cold of the asphalt seeping into his bones, the humiliation a bitter taste in his mouth. Thorne was right, he was losing. They were all losing. The injustice was a living thing, and it was growing stronger, bolder, feeding on their pain and fear, and there was nothing, it seemed, that could stop it. The confrontation at the gate broke something in David. He retreated into a shell of silent despair. The whiskey bottle, his constant companion. The fire in him had been doused by Thorne's cold, contemptuous power. It was Sarah who refused to surrender. While David mourned, Sarah raged. It was a quiet, focused rage, a mother's primal refusal to let her child's memory be erased by lies and intimidation. She stopped sleeping, she stopped eating, she stopped potting. Her life became a singular, obsessive quest for the one thing that could cut through Thorne's armor, proof. She turned Chloe's bedroom into a war room. The walls, once covered with photos of smiling friends and concert tickets, were now plastered with maps of the forest, timelines of the night Chloe disappeared, and enlarged photographs of the scratches on the car door. She spent her days and nights sifting through every piece of Chloe's life, every email, every text message, every diary entry, searching for a clue, a crack in the facade of the official story. She was looking for the piece that didn't fit, the detail that would unravel everything. The house grew silent, filled with the ghosts of what used to be. The smell of Sarah's clay was replaced by the scent of old paper and stale coffee. David would watch her from the doorway, a gaunt, haunted figure hunched over her daughter's desk, her face illuminated by the glow of a laptop screen, and he would feel a pang of guilt. He had given up the fight. She was waging it alone. The plot twist didn't come from a hidden camera or a secret recording. It came from a box of junk in the back of Chloe's closet. It was a small wooden box filled with the detritus of a young life. Movie stubs, dried corsages, friendship, bracelets, foreign coins. Sarah had been through it a dozen times, her fingers tracing the objects, each one a memory. A small, sharp stab of pain. She was about to close the lid for the last time when her eyes caught on something she had previously dismissed. It was a necklace, tangled in a string of cheap plastic beads. It wasn't a necklace Chloe wore often. It was a gift from Sarah, a piece she had made years ago in a fit of artistic experimentation. It was a silver pendant, shaped like a stylized raven, its wings outstretched. The edges of the wings were sharp, almost knife-like, a design flaw that had relegated the piece to the junk box. Chloe had thought it was too goth for her usual style. Sarah picked it up, the cold metal resting in her palm. She remembered the day she gave it to Chloe, how her daughter had laughed and put it on, doing a playful imitation of a vampire. It was a silly, meaningless memory. Yet as Sarah stared at the raven pendant, a strange, electric feeling prickled at the back of her neck, the sharp, angular lines of the wings. Her breath caught. She scrambled for the photos of the car door, her hands shaking. She spread them out on the floor, her eyes darting between the silver pendant and the magnified images of the scratches, the long, frantic gouges in the sapphire paint, the crude, desperate letters. She had assumed Chloe had used her Art Deco ring, the one she always wore. But the scratches, they were too fine, too sharp for the thick edge of the ring. With trembling fingers, she held the raven pendant over the photograph of the word help. She traced the letter H, the tip of the silver wing fit perfectly into the groove of the scratch. She traced the E, the L, the PA, perfect match. A key fitting into a lock. A sob escaped her lips, a raw, choked sound of dawning horrific understanding. This was it. This was the tool. Chloe hadn't been wearing it as a fashion statement. She must have had it in her pocket, or her bag. In the chaos and terror of the attack, she had grabbed it. A small, secret weapon. A way to fight back. A way to leave her mark. But it was the next discovery that shattered the world anew. She looked at the unfinished word, TRU, and the long, violent gash that sliced down the door. Everyone had assumed the attacker had stopped her, had wrenched her hand away. But as Sarah stared at the photograph, her potter's eye, trained to see the subtle imperfections and intentions in a line, saw something else. The final gash wasn't chaotic. It wasn't a slip. It was deliberate. It wasn't the end of a word. It was a symbol. It was an arrow. It pointed downwards, towards the bottom of the door panel. Sarah's eyes followed the line. There, almost hidden, in the dark curve of the door's lower edge, was a series of much smaller, finer scratches. Almost invisible in the other photos. They weren't letters. They were numbers. 814. Sarah stared, her mind racing, trying to make sense of it. 8. An address. A code. It meant nothing to her. She felt a surge of frustration. She was so close, on the precipice of something monumental, but the final piece of the puzzle remained just out of reach. She stayed up all night, staring at the numbers, her mind a whirlwind of possibilities. The answer came, as it often does. In the quiet light of dawn, she was looking at the map of the Monongahela National Forest. The one pinned to Chloe's wall, her eyes tracing the winding roads and hiking trails. And then she saw it. A small, almost forgotten road that branched off the main highway, a few miles past the overlook where Chloe's car was found. It was an old logging route, barely used anymore. Forest Service Road, 814. The arrow wasn't just an arrow. It was a map. Chloe wasn't just telling them who her attacker was. She was telling them where he took her. Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. The full monstrous scope of Thorne's plan became clear. He hadn't killed her in the car. The struggle, the scratches, that was just the beginning. He had taken her somewhere. Somewhere remote. Somewhere he thought no one would ever look. Forest Service Road, 814. She didn't wake David. She didn't call Sheriff Brody. They wouldn't believe her. They would call it another delusion, another grief-stricken fantasy. She knew, with a terrifying certainty, that she had to go herself. She grabbed a flashlight, a shovel, and the raven pendant. She put the silver bird on a chain around her own neck, its sharp wings cold against her skin. It was a talisman, a connection to her daughter's final defiant moments. It was a promise that the drive to the forest road was a blur. The sun was rising, casting long, eerie shadows through the trees. She found the turnoff easily, a dirt track half overgrown with weeds, marked by a faded wooden sign, FSR 814. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she turned onto the road, her small SUV bumping and lurching over the rutted terrain. The road wound deeper and deeper into the forest. The canopy of leaves overhead blocking out the sun, plunging the world into a perpetual twilight. The air grew colder. After a few miles, she saw something that made her slam on the brakes. Tire tracks. Recent ones. They were wide, the kind made by a heavy truck or a large SUV. They led to a small, secluded clearing. Hidden from the main track by a dense stand of pine trees, Sarah got out of her car, the shovel in her hand. The silence here was different. It wasn't peaceful, it was dead. She walked into the clearing, her eyes scanning the ground. The earth was disturbed. In the center of the clearing was a patch of ground, roughly 6 feet by 3 feet, where the leaves had been cleared away and the soil was darker, more loosely packed than the surrounding area. She knew. Tears streamed down her face, hot and silent. She wasn't crying from sadness. She was crying from a rage so pure and so profound it felt like it could split the earth open. She raised the shovel. "I'm here, Chloe," she whispered to the silent trees. "Mummy's here." She plunged the shovel into the soft earth. The sound was a sickening wet thud. She dug with a frantic mechanical strength she didn't know she possessed. She dug past the roots and the rocks, her mind numb, her body fueled by adrenaline and love. And then the shovel struck something. Something that wasn't a rock. Something that was soft, yielding. She dropped to her knees, clawing at the dirt with her bare hands. She uncovered a corner of a blue plastic tarp, her breath hitched. Her hands were shaking so violently she could barely function. With one last, ragged sob, she pulled the tarp away. The full conspiracy wasn't about power or politics or silencing a witness. It was about something far more simple and far more monstrous. It was about the ugly, private depravity of one man and the daughter, who had refused to be his victim, even in death. Chloe hadn't just left a clue, she had left a map to her own grave, and in doing so, she had given her mother the one thing she needed to burn Marcus Thorne's world to the ground. The plot twist wasn't just a clue, it was a resurrection. Chloe's voice, silenced for weeks, was about to speak, and the whole world was about to hear her scream, "Justice." Sarah realized as she stood over her daughter's shallow grave, was not a concept. It was a tool, like a shovel, like a raven pendant. It was something you had to wield with your own two hands. The law, she now understood, was a luxury. A system designed by men like Thorne to protect men like Thorne. Going to Sheriff Brody with her discovery was not an option. He would bury it, literally and figuratively. He would call it inconclusive, plant seeds of doubt, tangle the evidence in so much red tape that the truth would suffocate and die. The system had failed Chloe in life. Sarah would not let it fail her in death. The payoff had to be cinematic. It had to be public. It had to be undeniable. Thorne had used public opinion as his shield. She would use it as her sword. His humiliation had to be as total and as absolute as her grief. The perfect stage was already set. In 2 days, the town of Blackwater Creek was holding its annual Founders Day Gala. A black tie event celebrating the town's history and, more importantly, its most prominent citizens. This year, the guest of honor, the recipient of the prestigious Pillar of the Community Award, was Judge Marcus Thorne. He would be on a stage, in a tuxedo, bathed in the adoring spotlight of the community he had so thoroughly deceived. It was perfect. Sarah's first call was not to the police, but to the one person who she knew shared the burden of the truth, the quiet, terrified grocery store boy. Leo. She found his address in the phone book, a trailer park on the forgotten edge of town. When she knocked on the flimsy door of his trailer, he opened it a crack, his eyes wide with fear. "Mrs. Miller," he whispered. "It's Sarah," she said, her voice steady, imbued with a new, chilling calm. "I know you saw something, Leo. At the Overlook. I'm not asking you to tell me. I'm telling you that I know what he did. I know where he took her." Leo's face went pale. He opened the door wider. Sarah stepped into the cramped, musty trailer. She told him everything. The Raven pendant, the numbers. Forest Service Road 814, the shallow grave. She didn't spare him the details. She needed him to feel the weight of it, the horror of it. When she was finished, he was crying. Silent tears of guilt and shame streaming down his face. "I was so scared," he choked out. He's the judge. "He's a murderer," Sarah corrected him, her voice as sharp and cold as the silver pendant still hanging around her neck. "And on Saturday night, everyone in this town is going to know it. I need your help, Leo. Chloe needs your help." She saw the battle in his eyes, the ingrained fear of a powerless boy against the burgeoning courage of a man. The courage won. He wiped his eyes and nodded, a look of grim resolve settling on his young face. "What do you need me to do?" The plan was audacious, reckless, and theatrical. Leo's role was crucial. He was the tech guy. He was part of the high school's AV club, the kid who set up the projectors and sound systems for town events. He had a key to the community hall where the gala was being held. The next 48 hours were a blur of clandestine activity. Sarah, using Chloe's laptop, created a presentation. It was simple, brutal, and effective. It began with a beautiful, smiling photograph of Chloe, full of life and light. Then, a picture of the sapphire car door. Then, a close-up of the scratches, the desperate plea for help. Then, a photo of the Raven pendant, followed by an animation showing how its silver wing perfectly traced the letters. Then, the final damning slide, a picture of the unfinished word, true, with the arrow-like gash, followed by a map of the Monongahela Forest. With Forest Service Road 814 glowing in red. The final image was a photograph Sarah had taken with her phone, a picture of the disturbed earth in the clearing. She did not include a picture of what lay beneath it. That image was for Thorne alone. While Sarah prepared the presentation, Leo did his part. He went to the community hall under the guise of setting up for the gala. He connected Chloe's small, innocuous laptop to the main projector, hiding it behind a curtain on the stage, a wireless mouse tucked into his pocket. On the night of the gala, the community hall was filled with the town's elite. The men were in tuxedos, the women in glittering gowns. The air buzzed with self-congratulatory chatter and the clinking of champagne glasses. Marcus Thorne was the center of it all, magnanimous and charming, his wife Eleanor a silent, beautifully dressed accessory on his arm. He moved through the crowd, shaking hands, accepting praise. The picture of a man at the height of his power, utterly untouchable. Sarah and David arrived late. They hadn't been invited, but no one dared to stop them. They were the town's tragic figures, a grim reminder of the unpleasantness that lay just beneath the surface of the celebration. They stood at the back of the hall, their presence a discordant note in the symphony of denial. David's hands were shaking. He was terrified, but he looked at Sarah, at the cold, hard certainty in her eyes, and he found a reservoir of strength he thought was long gone. Mayor Thompson took the stage. He launched into a fawning introduction, listing Thorne's accomplishments, his philanthropy, his unwavering commitment to justice. And so, the mayor concluded, his voice booming, "It is my great honor to present the Pillar of the Community Award to a great man, a great friend, and a true West Virginia legend, Judge Marcus Thorne." The hall erupted in applause. Thorne walked to the stage, beaming, waving to the crowd. He shook the mayor's hand, accepted the heavy glass trophy, and turned to the microphone. The spotlight hit him, and he bathed in its warmth. "My friends, my neighbors," he began, his voice smooth as velvet, "I am humbled. Truly. In times of trial, a community shows its true character, and this community." He never got to finish the sentence. At the back of the hall, Leo's hand, hidden in his pocket, clicked the mouse. The large screen behind Thorne, which had been displaying the town seal, suddenly went black. A collective gasp went through the crowd. Then, Chloe's face appeared, 10 feet high, her smile radiant, heartbreaking. A murmur of confusion rippled through the hall. Thorne froze. He turned, his smile faltering as he saw the image of the girl he had murdered projected behind him. Click. The screen changed. The sapphire car door. Click. The scratches help. Thorne's face went white. He stared at the screen, his composure beginning to crack. The crowd was silent now, a thick, uneasy quiet settling over the room. Click. The raven pendant. Click. The animation. The silver wing tracing the letters. A sound, a collective intake of breath, swept the hall. People were turning, looking at each other. Their faces a mixture of confusion and dawning horror. Click. The final devastating slide, the unfinished word, the arrow, the map, the patch of disturbed earth. Thorne looked like he had been turned to stone. The blood had drained from his face, leaving a pasty gray mask of terror. His eyes were wide, fixed on the screen. On the picture of the grave he thought was his secret. And then, Sarah's voice, amplified by the hall's sound system, cut through the silence. She wasn't shouting. Her voice was cold, clear, and full of a terrible, righteous fury. "You left something out of your speech, Judge," she said, walking slowly down the center aisle towards the stage. David was right behind her. "You forgot to talk about your mentorship of my daughter. You forgot to talk about what happened in your car. You forgot to talk about Forest Service Road 814. Every eye in the room was on her. Then on Thorne. His mask of civility shattered, revealing the snarling, cornered animal beneath. "This is insane," he stammered into the microphone. "She's crazy. This is a slanderous attack." "Is it?" Sarah said, stopping at the foot of the stage. She held up her hand. In it was a single sealed evidence bag. Inside was a handful of dark, rich soil. Then you won't mind providing a DNA sample to compare against what the state police found in this soil. From the grave where you buried my daughter. The word grave hung in the air, sucking all the oxygen out of the room. Eleanor. Thorne let out a thin, piercing shriek and collapsed. The public arrest was almost an afterthought. The side doors of the hall burst open, and state troopers, alerted by an anonymous tip from Sarah an hour earlier, swarmed the stage. They didn't hesitate. They bypassed the sputtering mayor and the stunned local deputies. They surrounded Thorne, their movements swift and professional. Marcus Thorne, one of the troopers said, his voice devoid of emotion, "You are under arrest for the kidnapping and murder of Chloe Miller." The cinematic payoff was complete. The click of handcuffs, the flash of cameras from the local news crew who had suddenly appeared, the gasps and screams of the town's elite as they watched their pillar of the community, their hero, being dragged away in disgrace. Thorne didn't struggle. He was a broken man, his power, his reputation, his entire world dismantled in the space of 5 minutes by a grieving mother, a scared teenage boy, and the ghost of a girl who had found a way to speak the truth, even after her voice had been silenced. The aftermath was not a celebration. There was no cathartic release, no sense of victory. There was only a vast, hollow quiet. The media frenzy descended on Blackwater Creek like a flock of vultures, picking the town's bones clean. Before moving on to the next scandal, the trial was a formality. The evidence was overwhelming. The DNA from the soil at the grave matched Chloe's. Fibers from Thorne's Lexus were found on her body. His alibi, once so solid, crumbled under scrutiny. The witnesses, his powerful friends, suddenly had very foggy memories of the fundraiser in Charleston. Faced with a lifetime in prison, Thorne confessed. His confession, a flat, emotionless litany of his crimes, devoid of the remorse everyone had hoped to hear. He was a monster, and monsters don't feel regret. They only feel the inconvenience of being caught. Life in Blackwater Creek would never be the same. The fault line that had split the town became a permanent chasm. Neighbors who had defended Thorne now avoided the eyes of those who had doubted him. The town's self-image was shattered, its comfortable denial replaced by a collective, festering shame. They had been so eager to believe the powerful man, so quick to dismiss the grieving parents. The knowledge of their complicity was a poison that seeped into the soil of the community. For David and Sarah, the quiet was the loudest sound. The reporters left, the casseroles stopped coming. The trial ended, and they were left alone in their house, with the ghost of their daughter and the terrible gaping hole she had left behind. The rage that had fueled Sarah through the investigation receded, leaving behind an ocean of grief so deep she thought she would drown in it. David, sober now, became her anchor. They clung to each other, two survivors on a desolate shore. They buried Chloe in the town cemetery, on a hill overlooking the valley. They chose a simple granite headstone. Chloe Miller, beloved daughter. She collected light. Sarah placed the silver raven pendant on the cool stone of the grave marker. It had been a tool of justice, but it was also a reminder of her daughter's final, terrifying moments. It felt wrong to keep it. Its work was done. Leo visited them a few weeks after the sentencing. He stood on their porch, twisting the hem of his t-shirt. His face a mixture of sorrow and a newfound fragile confidence. "I'm leaving," he said. "My dad's going into a treatment program. I'm going to live with my aunt in Pittsburgh. Finish school there." "That's good, Leo," David said, putting a hand on the boy's shoulder. "That's really good. I just wanted to say." "I'm sorry," Leo whispered, his eyes filling with tears. "I should have done something sooner." Sarah stepped forward, and, to Leo's surprise, she hugged him. "You did something, Leo," she said, her voice soft. "You were brave when it mattered. Chloe would be proud of you. We're proud of you." He left a few minutes later, walking away with a straighter back, a lighter step. He was no longer just the witness. He was a participant in the story. A boy who had found his courage in the face of a terrible darkness. Months turned into a year. The seasons changed. The forest began its slow, inexorable work of reclamation. On the anniversary of the day, they found the car door. David and Sarah drove out to the overlook. They didn't go to Forest Service Road 814. They would never go there again. They stood at the stone wall, looking out at the vast expanse of green. The same view Chloe had seen in her final moments of freedom. The world kept moving. Cars passed. On the highway behind them, life went on. But for them, time had stopped here, at this overlook. It would always be the place where their world had ended, and a new, terrible one had begun. There was no healing from this kind of wound. There was only the learning of how to live with the scar. David took Sarah's hand. Her fingers were cold. He squeezed gently. She was so strong, he said, his voice thick. It was a statement, of fact, a truth as solid and as real as the mountains before them. Yes, Sarah whispered, her eyes on the horizon. She was. They didn't need a monument or a plaque to remember the cost of the truth. They carried it with them every day. It was in the empty chair at the dinner table, in the silence of her bedroom, in the phantom echo of her laughter. The emotional echo of what had happened would linger forever, a haunting reminder that sometimes the most profound injustices happen not in the dark, but in plain sight, and the most important truths are not spoken, but scratched into the surface of things, waiting for someone brave enough to read them. The forest was quiet now, but for David and Sarah, it would always hold the memory of a scream, a struggle, and a daughter's final, defiant act of love.